Hello everybody, this is Rutger Leukfeldt from the Netherlands. Today I will be talking about financial cybercrimes and situational crime prevention. I work for the Netherlands Institute for the Study of Crime and Law Enforcement and the Hague University of Applied Sciences. The NCR is a Dutch research institute, and me and my colleagues all study crime and law enforcement, and I lead the cybercrime cluster. And there we are specialized in doing studies like life course criminology into cybercrime criminal careers, the study of criminal networks, etc., etc. Very fundamental research. In the Hague University, we do much more applied research, and there we focus much more on the victim side of things. So I'm trying to combine both of these worlds in my work. Before I start, I also wanted to make sure that I'm a criminologist. I study cybercrime, and cybercrimes are often seen as very technical crimes, which is of course true. However, we criminologists do have an important role in studying cybercrimes and better understanding cybercrimes, because the human factor still plays an important role. Because I always say that the technical part is only a part of the modus operandi, and the attackers are still humans with their own motivations, with their own business models, with their own criminal careers. They work together with other criminals, so all of these processes of origin and growth are still very much important. And of course, the victims themselves also play a role, willingly or unwillingly, in the process of becoming a victim. So in the entire process of cybercrime, humans play a very vital role, and therefore criminologists should truly be much more involved into the study into cybercrime. So if you're interested in this topic, we published a research agenda a couple of years ago, as you can see on the left. You can download it for free, and we identified the major gaps in our knowledge related to human factor research into cybercrime and cybersecurity. We published it a couple of years ago, but I can tell you most of the topics that we then saw are still relevant today. The other publication I wanted to share with you is the one on the right, which is, to my knowledge, the latest book, edited book about human factor research, and it contains about 19 chapters of international authors of all sorts of topics related to human factor in cybercrime research. So if you're interested in that, see if you can get access to the library and download some of the chapters. Of course, you can always send me or Thomas Holt an email about one of the chapters. So that's my basic introduction about the topic. I'm here to talk about cybercriminal networks that are carrying out financially motivated attacks. I published a number of studies about these criminal networks with various authors, as you can see on the slide here. So what I will do today is not tell you about one particular study, but more tell you about the main lines that we discovered over the past decade or so. And if you're interested in any of these studies, you can have a look at what you see on the screen here. So today I will be telling about cybercriminal networks, and all of the information I'm going to share with you is not only based on the papers I mentioned, but I think the most important aspect here is that it's based on the analysis of police files. In the Netherlands, we have access to police files. Well, not everybody, but if you're a scientist and if you have a good research idea and it can also help the police, then you're able to get access to police files. And this really helps us to break the walls of silence that are common when it comes to criminals, but might even be more in place when it comes to cyber criminals. Because, of course, they don't really want to talk to researchers. They don't fill in surveys, so it's pretty hard to actually understand how they meet new people, how they recruit, how the networks start and then become larger, what the criminal capabilities are, etc., etc. So these police files are very relevant when it comes to finding out all sorts of details related to that matter. Because of the wide use of wiretaps, but also IP taps, so literally a tap on your IP address, and interrogations if they are able to catch somebody, observations, placing listening devices into houses, and of course, raid a house, do a house search, and then seize all of the interesting materials and analyze what's on there, including computers, USB sticks, etc., etc. And we get access to all of this raw data, and we are able to use them in our analysis to better understand cybercriminal networks. So this is basically what my presentation is based upon. I started doing this with 18 Dutch cases, and I published a couple of papers about that. Later on, we did the same in other countries, and at the moment we're still working on the Organized Crime Monitor, which is an instrument that has been established in 1995 and contains lots of the major organized crime cases in the Netherlands, now also including cybercrime cases, and we're still doing analysis on that data set today. And why is this important? Let me take you back about 10 years ago. I was already doing lots of research for the Dutch police about cybercrime, cybercrime reports, etc., etc. And I heard a lot of stories about, cybercrime is changing the game, and it's, these criminals don't meet in a traditional way, and all of the trust building processes are not really don't really matter anymore, because now we have the dark web and crypto markets, etc., etc. And I was very intrigued by that as a criminologist, thinking, okay, so this might change all of the things we know about criminal networks and how they operate and how we can break them down or stop them. However, when I started looking into the scientific databases, I could not really find lots of criminological pieces on cybercriminal networks. I would often find pieces of papers of computer scientists that analyzed a big forum or whatever, but there were not really lots of criminologists active in the field of studying cybercriminal networks. And it is important, because then I went back to the basics of traditional criminal networks, and I learned that most criminals don't work alone. Even for the most simple task, you have to use other people, and especially when it comes down to financially motivated crimes. Because you simply don't have all of the skills yourself to not only execute an attack, but also launder the money. So you need various people with various types of social capital. So social capital is contacts or skills or cash to be able to carry out financially motivated attacks successfully. Mind you, this is all still, true for traditional criminal networks. So I was very intrigued if this was still true for cybercriminal networks, because if this is true, it means that your social network is very important, and we know that because criminals are not able to place an ad in a newspaper saying, "Hey, we're looking for somebody that can help us to launder money, or somebody that can help us carrying out certain attacks." No. Of course, that's not something that you can do. So how do they recruit new people? Over the lines of family ties, friendship ties, etc., etc. So your social network is basically your opportunity structure to get involved into all sorts of crime and criminal networks. Also meaning that if you would draw a social network analysis of one of these international networks, that you would see all of these clusters as you see on this slide, because in the end, your social relationships are highly clustered and they are limited. I don't know any people in Korea. This might be the opportunity for me to actually meet somebody there and set up a network there. But at the moment, I only know people in Europe. So my social network is limited to a certain region of the world. And we can definitely see that within criminal networks too. This is, for example, a network, a drug trafficking network. And you see on the top left corner all of the drug dealers in Amsterdam, and they are interchangeable, because we know lots of these people. However, the orange broker that you see connects them with the supplier in South America. So traditionally, the broker or the offender convergence setting would be very, very relevant to actually gain your focus your criminal investigation onto. Of course, now the big question is that still the same when it comes to cyber criminal networks, because everybody was telling me, I have these crypto markets on the dark web, and well, they are there. This is an example of a somewhat older crypto market snapshot that we took a couple of years ago, while we were monitoring about 27 of these markets. So these new criminal meeting places are there. And it also means that once you enter one of these meeting places, which is not very hard, by the way, you can just Google how you can enter one of these crypto markets. Once you enter them, it's very easy to get connected with people outside of your initial social network. So, for example, in this market, they're not only selling drugs, but also digital goods, which could be credit card credentials, which could be malware, etc., etc. So if I wanted to get into contact with a malware writer from, let's say, Russia, this forum would enable me to do that in a very quick way. Furthermore, as they use rating systems and review systems, building trust is fairly easy, because just like eBay or another auction site, once you've done a sell, the buyer is going to give you a review. So it's very easy to identify who are trustworthy sellers and buyers. So this is all changing, of course, the nature of how criminals meet, how they build up trust, etc., etc. The big question remains, however, are these crypto markets used by all of these criminal networks, and do they indeed change everything we know about criminal networks? And this was the focus of my studies into criminal networks. Our hypothesis was that all of these networks now relied heavily on crypto markets. They were short-lived, meaning they would find suitable co-offenders for a job. They would carry out their criminal activities and then find other people for the next job. And this was also something that you would see in all of these papers of computer scientists, that it was changing everything we know about crime. However, as you can see in the graph here, I have to explain this a little bit. Everything above the yellow dotted line is recruitment or ties based on these crypto markets, or online ties at least. So it can also be a market on the clear web. And everything below the line is just recruitment over the traditional lines of offline social context. So we expected all of the networks that we would analyze to be type 4 networks, as you can see here, because in theory, you don't need any social context anymore, because you can by yourself go online, find other trustable sellers and other people that enable you to commit your crimes. And we actually saw a number of these networks. So they do exist, these type 4 networks, which are completely new and are completely changing everything we know about how criminals meet and interact, and what it means for trust. However, as you can also see on the slide, is there are much more of these types. And the first one is especially very interesting, because I was not expecting to see that at all. But there are also still criminal networks, cyber criminal networks out there that rely completely on social ties. So it's completely comparable to the traditional criminal networks that we know. And then there are new types of networks, so 2 and 3, which are a mixture of these offline ties and recruiting specialists online. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. And this is what I would do for every case that I analyzed, every police file that I analyzed, which could contain 10, 20, 30, 40,000 pages of material. I would try to boil that down to one paper with the hierarchy in there, the different roles, and all sorts of relevant information. And here you can see an Amsterdam phishing network, and I published about this in Trends in Organized Crime in 2014, because I thought this was a unique case and I'm never going to see it again. But this is a case of a phishing crew in Amsterdam that made about $1 million in a year during the investigation, the criminal investigation. So apparently, of course, they did make more than $1 million, but at least we know that for sure. But during that period, they made about $1 million. So they were a fairly successful phishing crew. However, as you can see, there is only one IT guy involved here, which is the orange icon that you can see. So this criminal network existed. Basically, all of the core members were you could call them traditional street criminals of Amsterdam. They all had a very large criminal career already, dealing drugs, etc., etc. They had contacts with the Dutch police, on various occasions. So they were known criminals, and they moved from dealing drugs to also committing cybercrimes. And they only needed one IT person to help them build these websites and make the databases required, etc., etc. And this is interesting because this successful cybercriminal network basically existed out of traditional street criminals that knew each other from the streets where they grew up. They recruited these bank employees and these postal employees and money mules along the lines of their social ties. So they would just go outside in their hood and try to get more people involved. And the IT guy, they also knew from scams that they performed in the past. The IT guy was staged in Nigeria, and we know that because we got a tap. The police had a tap on his phone, so we actually knew everything about how they would develop new websites and stuff like that. So this is a very, very traditional network that carries out cybercriminal activities. The other example I want to give is a Latvian network, so an Eastern European network. And we know that they partly also executed their malware scams from England, because the main rider was there. The other ones were all still in Latvia. And this is an interesting network because this is an example of a high-tech network that developed their own malware and were able to execute their scams in 7 different European countries successfully. And the biggest problem, however, was not infecting computers with malware and not transferring money from victim accounts, but getting enough money mule accounts, because in European countries, every bank has a profile of its customer, and if I would send money in the middle of the night to Latvia, an alarm bell goes off, and the bank knows that something fishy is going on, so they're going to stop this transfer. So what this Latvian network needed was a local crew of money mules, and they were recruited along the lines of family ties. So they would just find people in the Latvian community in big cities in the Netherlands and other countries where they attack people, and they tried to recruit new people just by using their own social network. So again, you see a very high-tech network that can execute scams from Latvia and the UK into different European countries, but they still needed their local embeddedness. So we always have the picture of hackers or cyber criminals as, a guy in a hoodie sitting alone in his room, but this picture is also true. It's much more, fairly traditional criminals that are out there in our cities and in our regions. I want to also address really quickly one of our findings related to the use of Bitcoins. Because one thing that everybody always kept telling me is, okay, so Bitcoin is definitely, or other e-currencies are definitely going to change the need of money mules and stuff like that. Well, money mules are still out there, and they've been saying this to me for about 10 years, so it's not true. However, when you look at the crypto markets, of course, everybody's paying each other in e-currencies. I think at the moment, Bitcoin is the number one again, meaning that there is a black box indeed. However, we have excellent information from one of the cases that we analyzed, in which the Dutch police took over one of these crypto markets and actually was able to investigate and observe the 5 biggest drug dealers, so these online drug lords. And indeed, they were selling their drugs over these crypto markets to customers all over the world, but mostly still in Europe. And they would receive their funds, their money, by getting Bitcoins. So indeed, it's very hard to trace it. But the key here is that these successful drug dealers that made hundreds of thousands of euros each month were not able to spend these Bitcoins because you need cash. And they ended up in the local Starbucks and McDonald's in train stations in the Netherlands to actually exchange their Bitcoins that they got from their online drug sales. And this is an interesting part, because this is where the new types of criminals, so online drug lords selling stuff all over the world, getting Bitcoins, this is where that world meets the traditional underworld of the criminals. Of course, here they still needed people that were able to laundry large amounts of cash. So here you can see the intertwinement of new networks and old networks, and still these crypto market drug lords still needed their local embeddedness to be able to get their money. And of course, that's the main priority, to get their money. So to wrap it up, we have new high-tech networks, but you also have traditional networks. And we tend to think that cybercrime is all about it's new, it's different, and that's partly true, and that gives us new problems. However, we have to remember that lots of these criminals are just humans and still try to work with people that they actually know. So we definitely see a fair amount of traditional networks here, and we see that cybercrimes and traditional crimes are highly intertwined. Furthermore, I want to emphasize the offline side of cybercrime. As I already mentioned, lots of these networks still heavily rely on offline social context. I think Jonathan Lusthaus, which is a discussant later on, has some excellent work that he did in Romania that shows exactly the same, that these networks there are heavily relying on their offline social context. So we can definitely see that from multiple sources, this is something that we see. And this, of course, gives lots of possibilities for law enforcement to still do some investigations and see who the recruiters are, etc., etc. And the local embeddedness, as I just mentioned in the Bitcoin case, still is very important. I do not want to downplay, of course, the new element of within cybercriminal networks. So these new online offender convergence settings, so the crypto markets or other meeting places, because we definitely see that these online ties are on the rise. So more and more of these ties become online ties, which is definitely going to change the origin and growth processes of these criminal networks. And we definitely see that these offender convergence settings are opportunity structures to quickly expand your criminal capabilities, because we did notice that the criminals that were able to use both their offline networks and their online networks were able to quickly become an international player. And of course, this is something that is new. And last but not least, we see that these crypto markets, or fora in general, are the universities of the underworld. So traditionally, I would have said, go to prison. That's where you learn a lot from other criminals. We see prison as the university for criminals. However, now it's changing to forums and crypto markets, because there is a big culture in there where it's completely normal to learn people all sorts of criminal stuff and to discuss new ways to commit fraud, etc., etc. So this is definitely something new and very interesting to see what it means to the criminal careers of young offenders. So this is it for me. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them after the presentation, and you can also contact me directly in the future on the email address that you see on the sheet. Thank you very much.